The phone vibrated during the most important meeting of the trip, flashing a familiar name that, this time, made my heart sink in a way I couldn't explain. I stood up, quickly stepped out of the conference room and walked toward the end of the hotel hallway in central London before answering. "I'm here, Emily. What's going on?" Her voice came through, soft but icy cold, as if the woman speaking to me was someone entirely different from the Emily I once knew. "Alexander, I'll get straight to the point. I've already sold our vacation house in Malibu, and I'm starting a new life with Brandon." I froze for a moment, feeling like someone had just punched me in the chest. Her words echoed in my mind, drowning everything else in a heavy silence. Brandon. I repeated the name in my head, not so much shocked as trying to understand how everything unraveled so quickly. "Wait, which Brandon? You mean your personal trainer?" I kept my voice steady, forcing myself to breathe. "That's right," she answered, her tone terrifyingly calm. "Brandon showed me a life you never could. Freedom, youth, and most importantly, real happiness." Every word she spoke cut like a blade against my pride. 17 years working as a financial advisor for some of the biggest corporations in America, I'd always prided myself on spotting every possible risk. Yet, my 14-year marriage to Emily was the one thing I never saw ending. "Are you serious, Emily? How could you sell the Malibu house without even telling me?" I said, trying hard to keep my voice from shaking. Emily let out a light, mocking laugh, as if I had just asked the most ridiculous question. "You still think you can control everything, Alexander. But you're wrong. I signed the sale papers yesterday. The buyer's moving in next Monday. I figured you wouldn't care. You've spent more time living in fancy hotels than in that house anyway." I felt the blood pounding at my temples but kept my anger in check. Never in my wildest dreams had I imagined Emily, the woman I once chose above millions, would say something like this so effortlessly. "Emily, if you think I'm going to just let this go, you're gravely mistaken," I said, my voice colder, sharper. "I won't stand by while you destroy everything we built just because you're being reckless." Emily chuckled softly again, a bit more smug this time. "Try whatever you want, Alexander. But save your energy and money. It's already done, and there's nothing you can do. I've chosen Brandon. I've chosen a future without endless meetings, business trips, and without you." I gripped the phone tighter, staying silent for a few seconds, forcing myself to stay calm. Finally, I said, quietly, "Don't think everything will go as smoothly as you planned. Life's never that simple." I hung up before she could say anything else that might hurt even more. Returning to the conference room, I sat down in my leather chair, trying to keep a neutral face, though my mind was in complete chaos. Outside the hotel, London's sky darkened. The first drops of rain hit the glass window, sliding down like someone's tears, snapping me back into a much harsher reality. All my life, I'd been the one steering the ship, but this time, it seemed Emily had made the first move, and I was being forced to respond. I opened my laptop and quickly drafted 2 critical emails. One to my longtime attorney, the man who had stood by me through my earliest deals, and another to my trusted real estate legal expert. The subject line glared on the screen. Urgent, Malibu property fraudulent sale attempt. I knew the battle was only just beginning. I left the conference room silently, pretending to check emails to avoid drawing attention from my international colleagues. Outside, the rain fell harder, turning London's streets into slick rivers under the glare of headlights. I hurried down the hall, up to my hotel room, and closed the door behind me, locking myself inside a quiet fortress, preparing for the silent war that had just been declared. I opened my laptop, launched my encrypted email software, and typed 2 familiar addresses. Ethan Walsh, my personal attorney for the past 15 years, who had steered me through countless complicated asset cases. Claire Morrison, the real estate legal expert who had been by my side every time I purchased a high-value property. The email subject was simple. Urgent. Need immediate title verification for Malibu property. Just a few minutes later, my phone rang. It was Ethan, always quick to react, as if law was hardwired into his instincts. "I read your email," Tell me everything, from the top, Ethan said, his voice low and serious. I recapped it briefly. The cold call from Emily, her announcement about selling the house, Brandon's name, and the smugness in her voice. Ethan was silent for a few seconds, then asked, Alex, do you remember what we did last year, when we restructured your assets? I leaned back in the chair, closed my eyes for a moment, and the full picture flashed through my mind. Exactly 12 months ago, in a late-night meeting in New York, Ethan and I had reviewed my entire personal asset portfolio after a significant market shift. Following his advice, I decided to move my Malibu property, the crown jewel of my real estate holdings, into a living trust under my sole control. The paperwork had been handled discreetly, folded into a refinancing batch for other investments. Emily, as usual, had signed the documents without reading, too busy texting to notice what she was approving. A cold smile flickered across my lips as I remembered that night. She hadn't even asked why there were 5 different sets of documents. All it took was my casual reassurance. Just restructuring for investment returns, love, and she happily signed. I pulled a thick envelope from my suitcase, containing certified copies of everything. An old habit I never abandoned, always traveling with crucial documents, just in case. Clear as day, the document read, Property. Beachfront Villa, 789 Ocean View Drive, Malibu, California. Owner, Alexander Carter, Living Trust. Trustee, Alexander Carter. Emily had absolutely no right to sell, none at all. I read the words out loud for Ethan. On the other end of the line, he let out a rare, short laugh. A sound you rarely heard from a man as composed as him. Well, that makes it simple. She tried to sell something she didn't own. The transaction's null, and if necessary, we can press charges for asset fraud. I inhaled deeply, feeling my calmness returning, a cold, determined focus tightening within every muscle fiber. I was no longer the betrayed husband in shock. I was Alexander Carter again, the man nobody outmaneuvers in major deals. We need to act immediately, I said, my voice lowering into steel. Already contacted Claire, Ethan replied. She's reviewing the transaction records at the Los Angeles County Registrar's office. If nothing has been recorded yet, we'll immediately request a transfer hold. Good. And Ethan? I paused for a moment, then said slowly, Don't hold back. This time, I don't just want the house back. I want them to understand that betrayal comes with a price. After the call, I stood up, poured myself a glass of whiskey, and stepped onto the balcony to watch the rain blurring the old city. Somewhere beneath those rooftops, millions of love stories were beginning, falling apart, or ending, and I, once believing myself immune to betrayal, had now become the main character in an old play. Betrayal wrapped in beautiful promises. I picked up my phone and quickly texted Claire. Confirmed the transfer status as soon as possible. Prepare to block any transactions. I'll be back within 24 hours. When I returned to the desk, the hotel lights reflected a stranger in the mirror. Cold, sharp, and fully ready to fight for what was his. And I knew this was only the beginning. I leaned back in my chair, half my whiskey gone, letting the memories drag me back. To a time when, if someone had told me Emily would betray me, I would have laughed in their face. 15 years ago, I met Emily at an investment conference in Chicago. She was working at a housing tech startup, and I was at the height of my corporate finance career. Emily, in a simple teal dress, stood out among a sea of stiff suits. Her confidence, the sharpness in her answers, drew me in from the very first moment. She wasn't afraid to argue, to challenge, and I, exhausted by endless cocktail parties full of meaningless small talk, was pulled into her radiant, fearless gaze. We married less than a year later, a small, simple wedding, just family and a few close friends, no extravagance, no spectacle. Exactly how I once thought love should be. 3 years later, we found our Malibu house, a small beachfront villa with huge glass walls opening onto the endless ocean. It was our shared dream, a place to escape the city's pressures, a place to grow old together with the sound of waves and salty air. We spent nearly $2,200,000, 0 cents on that house, almost all my savings for my younger years. I still remember Emily sitting cross-legged on the unfinished living room floor, beaming, saying, "This will be our paradise, Alex." Back then, I truly believed her. But like everything, cracks eventually appeared, silent and persistent, while I, busy building my career, failed to notice. About 2 years ago, Emily began to change. At first it was subtle, fewer questions about my work, fewer good luck texts before important meetings. Then they vanished altogether. Instead, there were late nights she claimed were work events, yet when I called, I heard loud music in the background. Then came the credit card statements, strange charges at unfamiliar restaurants, high-extent spas in Beverly Hills, weekend getaways with friends I never met. I remember once, after a long business trip to Tokyo, coming home to find a bill for a professional-grade home gym system delivered to our house. When I asked, Emily laughed. I decided to get serious about working out. Brandon, the new trainer at the gym, is coaching me. I didn't doubt her. I even felt happy she was caring for her health. Foolishly, I thought her focusing more on herself was a sign of maturity, not a warning of the distance growing between us. But slowly, the small signs connected themselves in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. The blatant lies about where she was. The way her eyes darted when I mentioned Brandon. The growing demands for space, as if the man she once loved had become a burden. I didn't create scenes. I didn't hire detectives or install tracking apps like many in my field would have. I just took notes. Every receipt. Every evasive glance. Every clumsy lie. And I prepared quietly. That's why, last spring, late at night, in Ethan's office, I nodded and signed the papers establishing the Alexander Carter Living Trust. No announcements to Emily, no hints. Just silent preparation, like a soldier quietly sharpening his sword before the final battle. After signing, Ethan looked over his steel-rimmed glasses and asked, "Are you sure, Alex? You might be saving your assets, but you might also be ending your marriage." I smirked. If a marriage depends on blind trust to survive, then maybe it ended a long time ago. Outside that night, Manhattan was drenched in heavy rain, just like tonight in London. Sometimes you know the ending, but you still have to wait for the lightning strike to truly wake up. And now, the phone rang again, snapping me back to reality. Claire Morrison's name flashed on the screen. I answered immediately. Her voice was urgent. "Alexander, I finished checking. There's something you need to know. Right now." I gripped the phone tighter, heart pounding. A creeping sense of dread slid down my spine. I pressed the phone closer. "Alexander," Claire repeated. "The records at the Los Angeles County Registrar confirm the Malibu house is still under the Alexander Carter Living Trust. No official transfer has been recorded." I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling a wave of relief. But Claire wasn't finished. "However," she hesitated, "there's a pending emergency request filed by a company called Brightwave Holdings, requesting an urgent transfer of ownership." I straightened up instantly, alert, as if doused with cold water. "Who is Brightwave Holdings?" I asked quickly. Claire flipped through her papers. "It's a newly registered LLC, owner listed as Brandon Lewis." That name hit me like a cold blade straight to the chest. Brandon, Emily's new lover. Not only stealing my wife, but now trying to steal the house I'd spent my youth building. "Don't worry," Claire continued, her voice firm. "We've already filed an objection, along with the trust deed. If needed, we'll petition the court to freeze all transactions until this is resolved." I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "Thank you, Claire. Stay on it. I'll be back in the US on the earliest flight." After ending the call, I opened my suitcase, pulled out a black portfolio, the one where I always kept my most important documents. Inside, the certification for the Alexander Carter Living Trust remained intact, laminated carefully, along with a notarized copy of the property transfer agreement from Ethan's office more than a year ago. I looked at the sharp lettering, the bright red seals, and knew this was the only shield standing between me and the scheme being spun by the very people I once trusted most. The habit of carrying original documents during business trips, something Emily had mocked countless times, had now become my ultimate preparation. I clearly remembered the night before my flight, when she stood in the doorway, arms crossed, shaking her head. "You're the most old-fashioned man I've ever met. Who even carries all that damn paperwork on a business trip?" I just smiled. I didn't blame her for not understanding. Not everyone knows that in my world, signatures and documents carry far more weight than promises. I turned on the desk lamp and flipped through the documents one last time. Everything was flawless. The dates, the content, even the notary seals. No loopholes. Satisfied, I closed the folder, slid it into my briefcase, and placed it beside my coat. If anyone thought they could outsmart me with amateur tricks, they were going to pay dearly. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about property anymore. This was betrayal at its most calculated. Betrayal aimed not only at gaining freedom, but at stripping away everything I had built. I sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, hands clasped together. Outside, the rain had stopped. The wet streets of London shimmered under the pale glow of streetlights. In that moment, a strange calm rose within me. No more anger, no more bitterness, only the cold clarity of a man who understood the rules and was ready to fight. I opened my phone and booked the earliest flight back to Los Angeles. Departure at 6 a.m., just a few hours away. After confirming the ticket, I left the room, threw on my coat, and headed down to the hotel lobby. The small bar in the corner was still lit. I ordered a strong espresso instead of whiskey and sat by the window, silently watching the movement outside. There, among the crowd rushing by, I was no longer Alexander Carter, the betrayed husband. I was Alexander Carter, the man who would never let anyone take from him without a fight. The battle was about to begin, and this time I was more prepared than ever. The 11-hour flight from London to Los Angeles had never felt so short. I didn't sleep. I didn't watch movies. The entire journey, I sat in silence, calculating every move like a chess game heading toward the endgame. Around 2 p.m., the plane touched down at LAX, bathed in California's harsh sunlight. I didn't head straight home. Instead, I rented a black SUV at the airport, avoiding my personal car to keep my return under wraps. Every passing minute, the tension inside me remained taut. I knew Emily had no idea I was coming back. She thought she still had a few days to finalize her plans in the shadows. But the overly confident often forget one thing. The silent ones aren't necessarily the losers. The SUV cruised along the Pacific Coast Highway. When I turned onto Ocean View Drive, where the Malibu house stood, my heart thudded hard against my ribs. The white Mercedes parked unfamiliar in my usual spot. The front door was ajar, and from inside, I heard laughter and snippets of conversation. I turned off the engine, rolled down the window, and sat quietly, observing. The afternoon sunlight cast long slashes across the tiled driveway, making the scene strangely beautiful yet distorted. I took a deep breath, stepped out of the SUV. The house key was still in my jacket pocket. I slid it into the lock without hesitation. The hinge creaked softly. I stepped inside, my footsteps whispering against the polished wood floor. Emily's voice carried from the kitchen, bright and casual. "Do you think we can knock down this wall? I want the kitchen open to the living room." A man's voice answered confidently. "Easy, babe, leave it to me. Open concepts add at least $1 million to beach properties." I kept walking, each step driving straight into the falsehood unfolding before me. Reaching the kitchen doorway, I saw Emily, in a thin white silk dress, a glass of red wine swaying in her hand. She stood close to Brandon, the young man with slicked back hair and a cocky grin. The moment they spotted me, the room froze. Emily's glass almost slipped from her fingers, and Brandon instinctively took a step back, his eyes darting around, searching for an exit. "Alexander," Emily gasped, her voice trembling. "What? What are you doing here? I thought you were in London until the weekend." I smiled and took another step forward, my voice steady. "Clearly, Emily, you thought wrong." Brandon tried to regain his composure, forcing a laugh. "Hey, this is just a misunderstanding, Alex. We were just talking about a few renovation ideas." I cut him off. "Renovations for a house you have no right to touch, Brandon." Emily gripped her wineglass so tightly her knuckles turned white. I placed my leather briefcase on the counter, slowly unlocked it, and pulled out the prepared documents. "Let me clarify," I said politely, though my voice was as sharp as ice. "This house has been owned entirely by the Alexander Carter Living Trust for over a year now. The only person authorized to make any decisions here is me." I pushed the copies of the documents toward them, letting the light reveal every undeniable signature and notary stamp. Emily lunged forward, scanning the pages quickly, her face draining of color. Brandon stood frozen, no longer smirking. "No, this can't be," Emily whispered. "You can't." I cut in, my voice flat. "Can't? You signed the paperwork, Emily. While you were busy texting, my attorney and I explained the refinancing terms. You just didn't bother to read." Brandon swallowed hard, turning to Emily. "You said everything was taken care of. You said it was just a name change." Emily stammered. I assumed." I folded my arms across my chest, my gaze sweeping over both of them. "You two plotted carefully. Selling the house, stealing the money, starting your little company. But too bad, the game ended before you even began." The kitchen air grew so thick it could have been sliced. Outside the window, the sunset poured blood-red streaks over the ocean. I turned away, gathering my documents, and said over my shoulder, "You have until the end of today to pack up and get out of my house. And a piece of advice, Brandon, find yourself a good lawyer. You'll need one sooner than you think." Without waiting for a reply, I walked out, my footsteps solid against the stone pathway. The first confrontation was over. But I knew the real battle had only just begun. The front door clicked shut behind me, leaving Emily and Brandon alone to face the brutal reality. But I didn't get far before hearing hurried footsteps chasing after me. "Alexander, wait!" Emily's voice rang out, choked with anger. I stopped and turned, standing under the porch light, the golden sand stretching behind me under the dying sun. She rushed toward me, hair wild, eyes blazing. "You tricked me!" Emily screamed, jabbing her finger at my face. "You knew I wouldn't read all those papers, and you let me sign anyway. This is fraud, Alexander. You didn't fight fair." I looked at her, calm as if listening to a poorly written speech. "Emily," I said slowly, each word heavy as stone. "All I did was protect what's mine. If you trust someone, you check. If you don't check, you take the consequences. That's always been the rule, and you know it better than anyone." She gritted her teeth, her eyes burning with bitter fury. "I'll sue you. I'll prove in court that you tricked me." I smirked slightly. "Go ahead, but remember, in court, they only care about signatures and black and white documents. Your emotions won't mean a thing." A long, heavy silence stretched between us, taut like a wire ready to snap at the slightest touch. Behind Emily, Brandon hovered awkwardly in the doorway, his usual arrogance completely gone. When my gaze swept over him, he immediately dropped his eyes and shuffled forward. "Alex, listen," he stammered, rubbing the back of his neck. I didn't know anything about the paperwork. I thought Emily fully owned the house. I don't want any part of legal trouble." I stared straight at him, my voice dry and cold. "Then you'd better leave immediately, unless you want your name showing up in an asset fraud investigation." Brandon paled. No further threats were needed. He clearly understood the consequences. With the amount of money involved, getting caught up in asset fraud could land him serious charges, possibly even criminal prosecution. I'll leave right now," he stuttered, before quickly retreating inside. Minutes later, I watched him lugging a duffel bag out the door, not even bothering to say goodbye or explain anything to Emily. He jumped into the white Mercedes and sped off like a man running from a ghost, leaving a faint trail of dust behind him. Emily stood frozen, as if someone had slapped her back into harsh reality. She watched the car disappear around the corner, then turned back toward me, her eyes red and brimming with anger and desperation. "You ruined everything, Alexander," she whispered, her voice heavy. I said nothing. No apologies. No pleas. Everything that once existed between us had ended the moment she chose betrayal. Emily clenched her fists, trying to suppress the trembling in her body. "You'll pay for this," she said, her voice raspy with rage. I answered, cold and steady like the waves pounding the distant shore. "No, Emily. Only the schemers pay. And your price will be higher than you think." Without waiting for her reply, I turned and walked away from the house, each step sealing the end of a chapter long rotted away. The blazing sunset stretched along the beach, the sound of the endless waves whispering that while people may betray, may change, the ocean remains steadfast, loyal to its eternal rhythm. And so would I. No more Emily. No more false dreams. Only me. And what was rightfully mine, guarded by clarity and an unbreakable will. The legal battle lay ahead. But tonight at least, I had reclaimed the first thing, freedom of the soul. That night, I drove straight to Ethan Walsh's office in downtown Los Angeles. Even past 8 p.m., his office lights were still on. For Ethan, asset and fraud cases never ran on a 9-to-5 schedule. I stepped in, carrying the prepared documents. Ethan looked up from his paperwork and motioned for me to sit before sliding a thick folder across the table. "There's something here," he said curtly, "and I think you'll want to know right away." I opened the folder, flipping through the pages quickly, scanning the cold facts. Joint account statements from the past 18 months. Over $170,000 in cash withdrawals. Transfers to a newly opened account under Emily Carson, Emily's maiden name. She opened her own account more than a year ago, Ethan said, his voice laced with contempt, and she steadily siphoned money from the joint account every month, labeling it as household expenses. I gripped the folder tightly. $170,000. Nearly our entire emergency fund. Money I once thought would be used for real emergencies or future investments. "And that's not all," Ethan continued, sliding another file toward me. "That money didn't just sit there." I picked it up and skimmed through it. Business license. Lease agreement for commercial space in Savannah, Georgia. Company registration for Evolve Fitness Studio. Owners, Emily Carson and Brandon Lewis. I let out a short, dry laugh. It wasn't just an affair. It was a full-blown, premeditated plan. Steal the money, sell the house, and build a new life on the wreckage they left behind. Ethan crossed his arms, leaning back in his chair. "They put down a lease deposit 3 months ago, which means this whole thing started while she was still calling you honey every night." I closed the file and sat in silence for a few moments, letting the anger simmer deep inside. "What about the house sale?" I asked, my voice low. Ethan nodded, clearly prepared. "We checked out the buyer, too." He pushed a document toward me. A copy of the failed purchase paperwork. Right Wave Holdings, LLC, a limited liability company registered in Nevada just 4 months ago. Legal representative, Derek Lewis, Brandon's brother. I stared at the paper, disgust spreading through me. "They planned to buy the house at roughly 15% below market value while you were out of the country," Ethan continued. "Then once you discovered the done deal, they'd force you into renegotiating, driving the price down even more under the pretense of helping you avoid bigger losses. A full-blown scam, both brazen and stupid. They didn't just want your wife," Ethan said bluntly. "They wanted everything you spent nearly 2 decades building." I pressed my forehead into my hand, breathing deeply to push away the dizzying sense of betrayal. "So what now?" I asked, regaining my composure. Ethan nodded, a determined glint in his eye. "We have the advantage. The trust deed protects the house. I've filed a temporary asset freeze with the LA County Registrar's Office and alerted the bank regarding suspected financial fraud." He paused briefly, then continued. "We'll file a lawsuit for asset fraud against Emily and Brandon if they don't settle. It's big enough that the DA could get involved if necessary." I stayed silent for a long moment, then nodded. Not just for the house, not just for the stolen money, but for the principle, for the honor, because betrayal this blatant couldn't go unpunished. I looked at Ethan, my voice firm. "Do it. No mercy." Ethan gave a slight, approving smile. "That's the Alexander Carter I know." That night, I didn't go straight home. I drove along the coastline, letting the freezing sea air lash my face, blowing away the fury burning inside. Outside my car window, the California night sky was filled with stars. The waves crashed tirelessly against the shore, reminding me, betrayal can steal many things, but determination can never be taken. The real fight was just beginning, and this time, I wouldn't just survive. I would reclaim everything, at any cost. The next morning, I was back at Ethan's office early. The summer sun of Los Angeles streamed through the tall windows, casting light over the strategic battle map spread out on the table. But today, the battlefield wasn't a negotiation or business deal. It was my own divorce. Ethan pushed a draft divorce settlement across the table. His voice was low, clear. This is our strategy. Fair, firm, and most importantly, it keeps you out of messy legal traps. I nodded and picked up the document. The settlement had 3 main points. Emily must return 60% of the stolen money, approximately $100,000. She forfeits any claim to the Malibu house and any other trust-protected properties. I forfeit any claim to Evolve Fitness Studio, the gym she and Brandon were trying to open. In exchange, I wouldn't file criminal charges for asset fraud, nor pursue emotional damages in court. Ethan looked at me over his glasses. This is a major concession, Alex. Are you sure? I smirked coldly. Some battles aren't worth getting your hands dirty over, Ethan. I just want my freedom. Money can be regained, honor cannot. He nodded, satisfied with my decision. I'll send the offer to her lawyer. But brace yourself. They won't swallow this pill easily. I simply shrugged. I was ready for anything. 2 hours later, Ethan received a response from Emily's side. Just as expected, they exploded in anger. Her lawyer, a fresh-faced kid probably just out of law school, called it an offensive proposal. Ethan recounted with a dry laugh. They're threatening to countersue and demand an equal split under community property laws. I sighed, unsurprised. Send them a copy of the trust deed, along with a detailed record of the unauthorized withdrawals, and remind them, nicely, that we're ready to file a fraud lawsuit if necessary. Ethan nodded, quickly typing away on his laptop. You think they'll fight or fold? I asked, voice calm. Ethan pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose. With evidence this thick, they're stalling, hoping you'll lose patience or slip up. But I'd bet in a few days she'll be forced to back down. I stood up and walked to the window, watching the busy streets below. A part of me still felt a bitter sting, not for the lost money, but for the trust shattered over 15 years. But I wouldn't allow myself to drown in regret. Life is a series of cold decisions. Those who refuse to wake up are buried by their own mistakes. That afternoon, I returned to the Malibu house. It was quiet, with only the distant rhythm of the waves filling the silence. I replaced all the locks and installed a new, stronger security system. No more carelessness. As night fell, I opened a bottle of red wine, poured a full glass, and sat on the porch, watching the moonlight glimmer on the sea. My phone buzzed, a text from Ethan. All documents sent. Gave them 48 hours to respond. If not, we file the lawsuit. I replied simply, deck to the plan. The wine in my glass trembled slightly with my deep breath. Not every wound needs revenge to heal. Sometimes, clarity and steadfastness are the deepest blows. Tomorrow would be a long day. But tonight at least I knew I was moving forward. Not out of hatred, but for justice. And I swore, this time, no one would take anything from me without paying the full price. 2 days later, right as Ethan's deadline expired, Emily's side responded. That afternoon, while reviewing new investment contracts at the office, my phone rang. It was Ethan. His voice was steady, but with an edge. Emily's lawyer just sent a formal reply. They're rejecting the settlement, accusing you of fraudulent asset transactions, and demanding an equal division under community property law. I let out a short, dry laugh, leaning back in my chair. No surprise. Emily still clung to the illusion that she could flip the script, that she could scare me into backing down. Good, I said briefly. Send them the supplemental documents. Ethan had already prepared. a copy of the trust deed showing I had sole ownership of the Malibu house for over a year, bank statements detailing the unauthorized withdrawals made under Emily Carson's name, business registration documents for Evolve Fitness Studio, jointly owned by Emily and Brandon, and the coup de grace, a copy of the prepared fraud lawsuit, and an additional asset freeze request. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to threaten. On this chessboard, evidence was my queen. 3 hours later, Ethan texted. They're requesting a meeting to renegotiate. She's starting to feel the heat. The meeting was arranged at a neutral office in Santa Monica. Me, Ethan, Emily, and her new lawyer. A sharply dressed but clearly inexperienced man. Emily entered the conference room dressed impeccably, as always. Fitted dress, high heels, flawless makeup. But her eyes lacked the old arrogance. Now they were wary, laced with bitterness. I didn't greet her. No need. Her lawyer began with a long, drawn-out speech about emotional distress, unfair asset division, and unprotected marital rights. Ethan and I listened silently, letting him exhaust his flimsy arguments. Then it was our turn. Ethan opened his briefcase, methodically placing each prepared document in front of them. With every new file dropped onto the table, I saw Emily's shoulders tighten. When the bank statements were presented, she bit her lip hard. When the gym's business registration surfaced, her hands trembled. But when Ethan laid down the fraud lawsuit and full asset freeze petition, I saw it clearly. The light in Emily's eyes went out. Her lawyer immediately requested a recess for private discussion. They stepped into the hallway, whispering frantically. I stayed seated, calmly sipping water. Outside the window, the golden Santa Monica sunset bathed the beach in a peaceful glow, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside that room. 15 minutes later, they returned. Emily didn't meet my eyes. She dropped into her chair, face stiff as stone. Her lawyer spoke up, voice much smaller now. My client agrees to the original divorce settlement terms. I nodded slightly, showing neither joy nor gloating. The outcome had been sealed the moment Emily chose betrayal. I was simply delivering the final verdict. Ethan carefully reviewed the terms once more. Emily to return over $100,000 within 30 days. She forfeits all rights to the Malibu house and any trust-protected assets. I waive any claim to Evolve Fitness Studio and agree not to pursue criminal charges if the payment terms are honored. When the documents were signed, I glanced at Emily. Her hand trembled as she pulled the pen, but eventually her signature appeared. Sharp, final, the true ending to an old chapter. The meeting ended. No goodbyes, no lingering looks. I walked out of the building, leaving the heavy past behind. The sky darkened, and the night ocean murmured against the sand. There was no triumphant victory inside me, only the quiet, solid strength of a man who had stood firm through the storm and reclaimed what was rightfully his. A new chapter was waiting ahead, and this time I would write it with every bit of clarity I had paid dearly to earn. 6 months after signing the divorce settlement, everything closed smoothly, as planned. The court approved the divorce decree, and my assets, especially the Malibu villa, remained fully protected within the trust, untouchable by anyone. Emily completed the repayment of over $100,000, on time, according to the agreement. There were no noisy court battles, no bitter revenge plays as I had once anticipated. I used the recovered funds the way I always believed, investment. A month after all the paperwork was finalized, I signed a contract to purchase a small office building in the western suburbs of Los Angeles. A 3-story property, not flashy, but solid, with stable tenants already in place. The building sat near a rising tech hub, where startups were popping up like mushrooms. The steady monthly cash flow wasn't just solid income, it was a reminder to myself. No matter what, investing in real value is always the best defense. As for Emily and Brandon, news of them wasn't hard to come by. Evolve Fitness Studio, their golden dream, officially opened in Savannah after multiple delays. But reality wasn't as rosy as they once pictured. Rumors spread fast in the small community, poor sales, sparse clientele. Even aggressive promotions couldn't save the studio. A high-end gym with premium prices wasn't what the laid-back, friendly Savannah crowd was looking for. An old real estate friend, while on a business trip nearby, dropped by the gym and sent me a short message. "The place is so empty, you can hear the treadmills creaking." I didn't reply. I didn't feel any satisfaction either. Their failure wasn't something I hoped for or waited for. It was simply the inevitable result of bad choices, building a life on a foundation of lies, betraying the trust others had placed in them. In the late afternoons, I often sat on the balcony of the Malibu villa, a steaming cup of black coffee in hand, watching the horizon where the sea embraced the red-orange sky. The sea breeze danced through my hair, salty, pure, sweeping away the last remnants of a life I had already left behind. I spent part of the summer renovating the house. The kitchen was completely redone, no trace of the fake parties or pretentious nights. The living room got a lighter paint color, the old heavy curtains replaced with natural linen that fluttered with the ocean breeze. Every small change felt like a cleansing ritual, clearing away the rot to make room for something new. Life now was very different from a year ago. Fewer parties, fewer obligations, more slow mornings, quiet evenings, and carefully planned investments made with sharp clarity. Sometimes, in rare moments of reflection, I wondered, if things had been different, could Emily and I have preserved the good we once shared? But then I reminded myself, the past, good or bad, can't be changed. Only the present and how we choose to live it truly matters. I no longer felt anger toward Emily, nor regret for the years we had. What was lost had taken part of the old me, but it had also forged a new version of myself, tougher, wiser. Life isn't built on love alone. It requires clarity and self-respect. Alexander Carter's story reminds us that trust can be betrayed, assets can be targeted, but self-worth can never be stolen if we have the courage to rise again. Sometimes loss is not an ending, but an opportunity to rebuild, stronger, wiser. In the end, true freedom and inner peace are the victories that matter most. What do you think about Alexander's journey and the choices he made? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more deep, inspiring, real-life family stories.